The most powerful shift in a relationship can begin when both people finally stop talking. No message, no explanation, no checking in, no attempt to repair what was left unfinished. And this is where the story becomes psychologically interesting, because when an avoidant and an empath both enter no contact, the silence does not affect them in the same way. In the beginning, the avoidant may feel lighter because the emotional pressure has disappeared. There is no difficult conversation to answer, no expectation to meet, and no emotional intensity demanding a response. Meanwhile, the empath may experience the opposite. The silence can feel painful because they are suddenly left alone with every unanswered question, every memory, and every emotion they were trying to process through connection. But here is the part most people misunderstand. These reactions can change with time. The person who seemed completely unaffected may eventually begin noticing the absence, while the person who once could not stop thinking about the relationship may slowly become emotionally free from it. No contact is not simply two people being silent. It removes the pattern that existed between them. The avoidant can no longer create distance while the empath moves closer. The empath can no longer keep repairing the connection every time the avoidant pulls away. For the first time, both people are forced to experience the relationship without the usual cycle controlling the emotional environment. In this video, we are going to break down exactly what can happen next, from the initial relief and emotional pain to the delayed processing that may appear later. You will learn why an avoidant can appear calm while still processing the loss internally, why an empath may suffer more intensely at first but eventually reach a deeper sense of clarity, and why the moment the empath stops chasing can completely change the emotional dynamic. We will also uncover a lesser-known truth about no contact. Its greatest effect is not always making someone miss you. Sometimes its greatest effect is revealing what each person was actually depending on the relationship to provide. By the end, you will understand why silence can expose attachment patterns that constant communication often hides, why returning to the relationship is not always the same as changing the relationship, and why the real turning point may happen when the empath no longer needs an answer from the avoidant. So stay with me until the end, because the final realization changes the meaning of no contact completely. Welcome to our channel, where we explore psychology, relationships, attachment, and the hidden patterns behind human behavior. If you enjoy content that goes deeper than surface-level relationship advice, make sure to subscribe and join us for more videos like this. No contact can look identical from the outside, but internally, it can create two completely different experiences. Two people can be sitting in the same silence while their minds are moving in opposite directions. One person may feel relief because the emotional pressure has finally stopped. The other may feel a sharp sense of loss because the connection that once gave them emotional information has suddenly disappeared. This difference becomes easier to understand when we separate the popular idea of an empath from the psychological concept of avoidant attachment. The word empath is commonly used to describe someone who is highly sensitive to other people's emotions, notices changes in mood and behavior, and often feels strongly motivated to understand, support, or repair emotional tension. It is not a formal attachment style or clinical diagnosis. It is better understood as a description of emotional sensitivity and interpersonal awareness. An avoidant attachment pattern, on the other hand, is a recognized psychological concept. People with stronger avoidant tendencies may place a high value on independence, feel uncomfortable with excessive emotional closeness, and respond to emotional pressure by creating distance. This does not mean every avoidant person is cold, uncaring, or incapable of love. In fact, one of the most important points is that emotional distance and emotional indifference are not always the same thing. A person can care deeply and still struggle with closeness. A person can miss someone and still feel the urge to withdraw. A person can experience emotional pain and still respond by becoming quieter, rather than reaching toward the person they miss. This is why no contact can reveal such a powerful contrast. The empath may naturally process emotional uncertainty by moving toward it. They may want to talk about what happened, understand the other person's feelings, clarify misunderstandings, and repair the emotional connection. When something feels wrong, their instinct may be to investigate the problem. What happened? Why did the person's behavior change? Did I do something wrong? Is there still a chance to fix this? These questions can keep the mind active long after communication has stopped. The avoidant may approach the same uncertainty in the opposite direction. Instead of moving closer to uncomfortable emotions, they may create distance from the emotions themselves. They may become busy, focus on work, spend more time alone, distract themselves, or simply convince themselves that they need to move forward. This difference matters because the absence of communication removes the usual method each person used to regulate the relationship. When the avoidant pulled away, the empath may have responded by reaching out. When the empath reached out, the avoidant may have experienced more emotional pressure and pulled away again. This creates a cycle that can continue for months without either person fully understanding why it keeps happening. Once no contact begins, that cycle suddenly loses one of its most important ingredients. There is no immediate pursuit, there is no immediate withdrawal, there is only silence, and for the avoidant, that silence can initially feel surprisingly comfortable. The messages stop, the questions stop, the emotional conversations stop. There is no immediate expectation to explain feelings that they may not know how to explain. There is no pressure to respond before they feel ready. There is no emotional confrontation waiting on the phone. The nervous system can experience this reduction in pressure as relief. This is one reason an avoidant person can appear completely unaffected after communication ends. Their calm appearance does not automatically tell you what they feel about the relationship. It may simply tell you that the source of immediate emotional pressure has disappeared. Research on attachment avoidance has linked avoidant tendencies with more self-reliant forms of coping following relationship loss and with fewer obvious proximity-seeking behaviors. In simple terms, a person who leans toward avoidance may be more likely to deal with emotional pain privately, rather than showing it through obvious attempts to reconnect. That creates a dangerous misunderstanding for the other person. The empath may look at the silence and think, they do not care. But the truth can be more complicated. Silence tells you that someone is not communicating. It does not automatically tell you what they feel internally. At the same time, relief should never be confused with emotional resolution. A person can feel calmer because a difficult situation has stopped while still carrying unresolved feelings about what happened. Think about the difference between removing pressure and solving the problem. If a difficult conversation ends, the immediate tension may disappear. But the issue that created the tension may still exist. The same principle can apply to emotional distance. The avoidant may initially experience freedom from pressure without having fully processed the meaning of the separation. Meanwhile, the empath can experience the opposite reaction. The silence may feel louder than the conversation ever did. Every unanswered question becomes more noticeable. The mind begins searching for explanations because it no longer has access to the emotional feedback it was receiving before. A delayed reply once provided information. A change in tone provided information. A small gesture provided information. Even an argument provided information because at least there was interaction. No contact removes all of that. Suddenly, there are fewer facts and more uncertainty. This can create an information vacuum, and the human mind does not enjoy uncertainty. It tries to close the gap. That is why an emotionally invested person may replay old conversations, examine the last message, remember small details, and wonder whether a different choice could have changed the outcome. The mind keeps returning to the same relationship because it is searching for an answer that communication used to provide. The empath may wonder whether they should have been more patient. Maybe they asked for too much. Maybe they should have given more space. Maybe the other person was simply overwhelmed. Maybe one more conversation could fix everything. This is where emotional sensitivity can become exhausting. Understanding another person's pain can make it difficult to recognize your own. The empath can become so focused on explaining the avoidance behavior that they forget to ask what that behavior is doing to them. They may understand why the other person withdraws, but understanding does not erase the emotional impact of being repeatedly left in uncertainty. And this is where the silence begins changing the empath as well. At first, the question may be, what are they feeling? Then, after enough time passes, another question begins to appear. What am I feeling? That question can be much more important. Because when the empath stops chasing an explanation, they finally have space to observe the relationship from outside the emotional cycle. They may begin noticing how often they were monitoring the other person's mood, how often they were trying to repair tension, how often they were adjusting their own behavior to prevent another withdrawal, how often they were waiting for reassurance, how much emotional energy was being spent simply trying to keep the connection stable. This is one of the lesser-known effects of no contact. It can reveal how much emotional work was happening behind the scenes. When communication is constant, that work can feel normal. Once communication disappears, the difference becomes easier to see. The empath may begin realizing that they were not only missing the person, they were also missing the routine of checking, fixing, explaining, waiting, and hoping. As that routine disappears, the emotional system slowly has fewer reasons to remain on alert. The person who once waited for a message may eventually stop checking the phone. The person who once analyzed every silence may begin accepting that silence is information in itself, not information about whether they are worthy, not information about whether they were lovable, but information about what the other person is currently capable of giving. This is where the old relationship pattern starts losing its power. The avoidant can no longer withdraw in response to pursuit because there is no pursuit. The empath can no longer regulate the relationship by constantly reaching out because they have stopped reaching. For the first time, both people are left with their own internal reactions instead of using each other to manage those reactions. The avoidant may have to sit with emotions that distance previously helped them avoid. The empath may have to sit with uncertainty without immediately trying to resolve it. Neither experience is necessarily comfortable, but discomfort can reveal patterns that constant contact keeps hidden. The old cycle may have looked like this. The avoidant pulls away. The empath senses the distance. The empath reaches closer. The avoidant feels more pressure. The avoidant withdraws further, and the empath becomes even more emotionally activated. Then the cycle begins again. No contact interrupts that sequence. It does not guarantee reconciliation. It does not guarantee regret. It does not guarantee that either person will return. What it does is remove the immediate interaction that kept the pattern alive. And once that pattern disappears, the empath has an opportunity to reclaim emotional energy that was previously being spent on monitoring and repairing the relationship. They can stop explaining themselves. They can stop trying to decode every silence. They can stop treating every change in behavior as a problem they must solve. Slowly, the focus can move away from getting a reaction from the avoidant and toward understanding their own emotional needs. This is why healthy no contact should never be treated as a psychological trick designed to make someone miss you. If the only purpose is to provoke a reaction, the emotional attachment remains in control, because every day of silence becomes another test. Did they reach out yet? Are they thinking about me? Do they miss me? Why have they not contacted me? That is not freedom. That is still emotional monitoring from a distance. Healthier no contact creates space for something very different. It allows a person to stop managing the relationship long enough to understand themselves without constantly reacting to the other person's behavior. And once that happens, the silence begins doing something neither person may have expected at the beginning. It stops being only about the absence of contact and starts becoming a mirror. The avoidant has space to confront what closeness means to them. The empath has space to confront what they were willing to tolerate for connection. The emotional distance remains, but the meaning of that distance begins to change, as both people are forced to experience the relationship without the old pattern controlling every interaction. At first, the silence may feel exactly like what the avoidant wanted. The messages have stopped. The questions have stopped. The emotional conversations have stopped. There is no one asking for an explanation, no one waiting for reassurance, and no one standing at the emotional door asking them to come closer. For a person who tends to manage emotional pressure through distance, this can create an immediate sense of relief. The tension is gone. The responsibility to respond feels gone. The relationship is no longer demanding their attention in the same direct way. From the outside, this can look like complete indifference. They may continue with their routine. They may stay busy. They may appear calm. They may not contact the other person at all. And this is where many people make their first mistake. They assume that because the avoidant is not reaching out, the avoidant must not care. But behavior and internal emotion are not always identical. Avoidant attachment is associated with strategies that reduce emotional closeness and help a person maintain distance when intimacy feels uncomfortable. That means the absence of obvious emotional behavior does not automatically prove the absence of emotion. Sometimes the first stage is simply emotional distance doing exactly what it was designed to do. It creates enough space for the person to feel less overwhelmed. But as the days pass, another experience can begin. The silence stops feeling like freedom and starts becoming noticeable. There is a major difference between wanting space from someone and discovering that the person is no longer available in the same way. When the empath was still reaching out, the avoidant could take the connection for granted. The relationship was still there in the background. Even if they did not answer immediately, there was usually a familiar person somewhere on the other side of the silence. There was someone who cared, someone who remembered, someone who might eventually check in, someone who might try to repair the tension after an argument. That emotional availability can become almost invisible when it is always present, but once it disappears completely, the mind may begin registering the difference. There is no familiar message waiting, no emotional reassurance, no person asking whether everything is okay, no one trying to understand what happened, no one attempting to restore the connection. And that is when the avoidant may begin confronting a thought that feels very different from the thought they had at the beginning. At first, the thought may have been, "I needed space." Later it can become, "This person is actually gone from my daily emotional world." Those two experiences are not the same. Wanting distance is about controlling closeness. Losing access to someone is about confronting absence. The second one can be much harder to ignore. This does not mean every avoidant will suddenly miss the person, regret the breakup, or come running back. Human beings are too complicated for that kind of guarantee. Attachment patterns are tendencies, not predictions of exactly what someone will do. But research on attachment and relationship dissolution suggests that people with different attachment orientations can use different emotional regulation strategies after a breakup or separation. Some people seek support and express distress openly. Others rely more heavily on self-reliance, distraction, suppression, or emotional distancing. That difference can create a timing problem. One person may appear devastated while the other appears perfectly fine. Yet the person who looks fine may simply be processing the event through a different emotional strategy. This is where delayed emotional processing becomes important. The empath may feel the loss immediately because they are already emotionally engaged with the meaning of what happened. They may replay conversations while the avoidant is trying not to think about them. They may ask questions while the avoidant is trying to create mental distance. They may feel everything at once while the avoidant is placing the experience into a mental compartment and continuing with daily life. But emotional avoidance can change the timing of emotional awareness. What is not processed does not necessarily disappear. It may simply remain outside conscious attention for a while. This can create one of the most confusing reversals in the entire relationship. The empath looks like the person who is struggling more in the beginning. They may cry more, think about the relationship more, feel the urge to reach out more, search for explanations more often. Meanwhile, the avoidant may appear completely unaffected. But weeks or months later, the emotional positions may begin changing. The empath may start accepting reality. They may stop checking. They may stop wondering what the other person is doing. They may begin rebuilding their daily life without constantly connecting everything back to the relationship. The avoidant, meanwhile, may finally have enough emotional space for memories to surface. This is not necessarily because they suddenly developed feelings. The feelings may have been there all along. The difference may be that the emotional noise has finally become quiet enough for them to notice those feelings. Once the immediate pressure disappears, the mind can begin reconstructing the relationship from a different angle. The avoidant may remember moments that once felt ordinary, the consistency of the empath, the way they were always available, the small acts of care that were easy to overlook because they happened repeatedly. The conversations that once felt too emotional may suddenly seem meaningful. The person who once felt like a source of pressure may now be remembered as a source of comfort. This is where memory can become surprisingly powerful. When someone is physically and emotionally present, the brain tends to focus on what is happening right now. During conflict, the negative aspects of the relationship can become louder. But once the conflict disappears, the mind may have room to access different memories. A person may remember the warmth without the argument, the support without the pressure, the laughter without the tension, the familiar voice without the difficult conversation. This does not mean the mind is suddenly giving an objective report of the relationship. Memory is selective. It can highlight positive moments and minimize painful ones. It can also romanticize what has been lost. That is why remembering someone is not the same as understanding what went wrong. Missing someone is not proof that a person is ready to change. Wanting contact is not proof that someone has learned how to communicate. Feeling lonely is not proof that they can now tolerate emotional intimacy. This distinction is essential because many people interpret a possible return as evidence that the relationship has been repaired before any repair has actually happened. A message can reopen a door without changing what happened behind that door. The avoidant can miss the empath and still struggle with closeness. They can regret losing the person and still repeat the same withdrawal pattern. They can want another chance and still lack the emotional skills required to make that chance healthy. That is why the real psychological question is not simply whether the avoidant eventually thinks about the empath. The more important question is what happens after the thought appears. Does the person reflect on their behavior? Do they recognize the impact of repeated withdrawal? Can they communicate discomfort without disappearing? Can they remain present during difficult conversations? Can they tolerate closeness without immediately needing distance? Those questions reveal much more than a simple message ever could. And while all of this may be happening internally for the avoidant, something equally important can be happening inside the empath. The empath may slowly reach a realization that changes the entire meaning of the relationship. At the beginning, they may have believed closure would come from the avoidant. They may have thought, if they could just explain why they did this, I could finally move forward. They may have believed that one honest conversation would remove the confusion. They may have wanted an apology, an explanation, or some clear acknowledgement that their pain was real. But with enough distance, another realization can appear. I do not need them to understand my pain for my pain to be real. That sentence represents a major psychological shift. The empath stops waiting for the person who created the confusion to become the person who provides all the answers. They begin separating understanding from acceptance. They can understand that someone has attachment wounds without accepting behavior that repeatedly hurts them. They can recognize why someone withdraws without making excuses for every withdrawal. They can have compassion without abandoning their boundaries. This is where empathy becomes healthier. Real empathy does not require unlimited access to someone. It does not require endless patience. It does not require staying in a cycle that constantly drains you. And once the empath understands this, the goal changes. They are no longer trying to prove that they are worth choosing. They are no longer trying to become so understanding that the other person finally feels safe enough to stay. They are no longer treating the relationship as a problem they personally have to solve. They begin asking a different question. Does this relationship allow me to remain myself? That question is much harder to ignore. Because once the empath stops chasing, the avoidant is no longer responding to pursuit, and the empath is no longer responding to withdrawal. The old cycle loses its fuel. The silence becomes a space where both people can see what they were actually contributing to the pattern. And if the avoidant eventually returns, this is where the entire meaning of that return changes. The question is no longer simply, do they still love me? Love alone cannot repair a pattern. The better questions become much more uncomfortable. Why are they coming back? Are they lonely, or are they ready to connect differently? Do they miss the person, or do they miss the emotional comfort that person provided? What has actually changed? Can they communicate when things become uncomfortable? Can they express a need for space without disappearing? Can they return after taking space instead of leaving the other person trapped in uncertainty? Can the empath express their needs without feeling guilty for having them? These questions matter because a return without change can simply restart the same cycle. The first few conversations may feel incredible. The relief can be intense. The connection may feel familiar. Both people may believe that this time will be different. But if the underlying pattern remains untouched, the same sequence can eventually return. The avoidant feels overwhelmed. Distance begins. The empath becomes anxious. They reach for reassurance. The avoidant experiences more pressure. More distance follows. And suddenly the relationship is standing in the same place it was before. This is why the real transformation is not when the avoidant finally notices the silence. It is when both people become capable of responding differently to what the silence revealed. The avoidant may need to learn that closeness does not automatically mean losing independence. The empath may need to learn that love does not require constant emotional labor. One person learns to stay present. The other learns to stop overfunctioning. And somewhere between those two changes, the relationship either becomes healthier or becomes something they finally have the strength to leave behind. In the end, no contact was never really about making the avoidant miss you. It was never about counting the days until they reached out, checking your phone to see if their name appeared, or staying silent just to create a reaction. The deeper purpose of no contact is much more powerful. It removes the distraction. It removes the constant emotional exchange that can hide what is really happening underneath. When the messages stop, the chasing stops, the withdrawing stops, and the explanations stop, both people are finally left with themselves. The avoidant has to face their relationship with closeness. They may have to recognize why emotional intimacy felt threatening, why distance felt safer, and why walking away was easier than staying present during difficult emotions. And the empath has to face something equally important. They have to look at how often they abandon their own needs while trying to understand someone else's. They have to recognize how many times they accepted uncertainty because they were afraid that asking for consistency would push the other person away. They have to understand that compassion does not require self-sacrifice, and understanding someone's wounds does not mean allowing those wounds to become your pain. This is why no contact can become a turning point. Not because silence magically changes another person, but because silence removes the relationship pattern that allowed both people to keep repeating the same behavior. The avoidant can no longer use distance as an immediate escape from emotional pressure, and the empath can no longer use pursuit as a way to restore emotional security. Eventually, both people face a choice. They can return to the same pattern, or they can grow beyond it. They can repeat the same cycle with different words, or they can finally understand what the cycle was trying to teach them. And if the avoidant comes back, the most important question is no longer, did they miss me? It becomes what has changed, because someone can miss you and still hurt you. Someone can love you and still be unable to give you the relationship you need. Someone can return without becoming capable of staying. Real change is not proven by a message. It is proven by consistent behavior, honest communication, emotional responsibility, and the ability to remain present when closeness becomes uncomfortable. And if they never come back, that does not mean you lost. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens when you stop waiting for someone else's decision to determine your worth. The real victory is not making the avoidant come back. The real victory is becoming so grounded in yourself that their return is no longer required for you to feel whole. You stop asking whether they finally understand your value, because you already understand it yourself. You stop needing their apology to validate your pain. You stop needing their attention to validate your importance. You stop confusing their distance with your worth. And that is when no contact becomes more than silence. It becomes freedom. So if this video helped you understand the hidden psychology behind avoidant attachment, emotional distance, and the no-contact dynamic, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more deep relationship psychology and attachment content. If you found value in this video, give it a like because it helps this message reach more people who may be going through the same emotional cycle. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes one video can help a person stop chasing an answer and start choosing themselves. Remember, you cannot control whether someone comes back. You cannot control whether they finally understand what they lost. But you can control whether you continue losing yourself while waiting for them. And sometimes, the moment you stop waiting is the moment your life finally starts moving forward.